The Tallman's haunted bunk beds, # the arrival. It started with an innocent purchase. In 1987, the Tallman family, Debbie, Alan, and their 3 children, were searching for a new bunk bed for their 2 youngest. Money was tight, so when Debbie found a sturdy wooden set at a second-hand shop in Horicon, Wisconsin, she didn't hesitate. The elderly store owner, however, had been oddly hesitant, as if he wanted to say something but bit his tongue. That night, as Alan set up the bunk beds in their children's room, an unsettling feeling crept over him. He dismissed it as exhaustion. But when he finished and turned to leave, he swore he heard a whisper, too low to make out, but unmistakably there. At first, everything seemed normal. The kids loved their new beds, and the family settled back into routine. But that changed within a week. It began with small, unexplainable things. The alarm clock in the children's room going off at random times, even when unplugged. A shadowy shape lingering just outside the window, disappearing the moment someone looked directly at it. The family dog, normally friendly and playful, refused to enter the children's room, instead growling at the bunk beds from the hallway. One night, their youngest, Emily, woke up screaming. When Debbie rushed in, she found her daughter trembling under the covers. "It was in my room," Emily sobbed. "It was watching me." The next night, their son Danny saw it, a figure, tall and thin, with hollow, burning eyes, standing in the corner of the room. When he screamed, it vanished. Alan was a skeptic. He dismissed his children's stories as nightmares until it happened to him. Late one evening, while checking on the kids, Alan turned to leave the room. But the moment his back was turned, an icy wind rushed past him. He spun around just in time to see the closet door swing open on its own. Then the voice came, a guttural whisper, slithering through the darkness. "Get out." The words weren't shouted, but they carried a force that made Alan's stomach drop. His legs locked in place. And then, silence. Shaken, Alan told Debbie nothing. Maybe it was his imagination, maybe stress was playing tricks on him. But the next night, it got worse. Debbie was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when she heard footsteps echoing from the basement. Alan was at work. The kids were asleep. The footsteps grew heavier, closer. Holding her breath, she crept toward the basement door, gripping the handle. Silence. Then, suddenly, bang! Something on the other side slammed against the door with terrifying force, shaking it on its hinges. Debbie stumbled back, her heart hammering. The doorknob twisted. She ran. When Alan came home, he found his wife trembling, clutching a knife in the living room. "Something's in the house," she whispered. That night, Alan decided to put an end to the fear. He grabbed his Bible and stormed into the children's room, standing before the bunk beds. "Leave my family alone," he shouted. "You are not welcome here." For a moment, the room was still. Then the beds shook. Alan staggered backward as an invisible force rattled the wooden frame. A low, guttural growl filled the air, and then silence. The beds stopped moving. The air felt thick, suffocating. Alan refused to sleep that night. And just when he thought the worst had passed, he heard it, something moving down the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They stopped outside his bedroom door. And then, the knob began to turn. The history of the Tallman's haunted bunk beds. The terrifying events that unfolded in the Tallman household in the late 1980s are among the most chilling haunted furniture cases in American history. While the true origins of the bunk beds remain a mystery, their presence in the Tallman home triggered a series of disturbing paranormal occurrences that ultimately drove the family to flee. The purchase. In early 1987, Alan and Debbie Tallman, a hard-working couple from Horicon, Wisconsin, were searching for a bunk bed for their 2 youngest children. They found a sturdy wooden set at a local second-hand store and purchased it without hesitation. However, there were whispers about the bed's past. Some claimed it had once belonged to a family that experienced tragedy, though no records could confirm this. The elderly store owner allegedly hesitated before selling it, but the Tallmans, unaware of any sinister history, took it home. The haunting begins. From the moment the bunk beds were placed in the children's room, strange occurrences plagued the household. At first, it was minor. Alarm clocks malfunctioning, radios turning on by themselves, and the family dog refusing to enter the room. But soon, things escalated. The children began seeing a dark figure lurking in their room. Doors opened and closed on their own, An eerie, guttural whisper echoed through the house, saying, "Get out." As weeks passed, the entity grew more aggressive. One night, the Tallman's youngest daughter woke up screaming, claiming she had seen a faceless figure watching her from the foot of her bed. Their son reported seeing a gaunt, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. Escalation and the final night. Alan, initially skeptical, soon became a witness to the unexplainable. One night, he saw a ghostly woman with a deformed face standing in the hallway. Another night, while sleeping on the couch, he awoke to see a fire-like glow emerging from the bunk beds, only for it to vanish when he turned on the lights. The final straw came when a towering, shadowy figure appeared, whispering in a voice that made Alan's blood run cold. "You can't leave." Terrified, the Tallmans fled their home. They removed the bunk beds and destroyed them, burning them to ash. From that moment on, the haunting stopped. Aftermath and theories. The story of the Tallmans' haunted bunk beds gained national attention when it was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in 1989. Paranormal investigators and skeptics debated the cause, with some believing the beds were cursed or had absorbed negative energy from a past tragedy. Others speculated that the house itself had a dark history unknown to the family. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the Tallmans never looked back. But to this day, some locals claim that if you go near the area where the house once stood, you can still feel something watching. The shadow in the corner. The doorknob twisted once, then again. Alan held his breath, gripping Debbie's hand as they sat frozen in bed. A low, creaking sound filled the air as the bedroom door swung open, but no one was there. Then, the hallway light flickered, and beyond it, at the end of the corridor, something stood in the darkness. Tall, gaunt, eyes like embers burning in a hollow face. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just watched. Debbie let out a strangled gasp, snapping Alan out of his trance. He lunged for the lamp, flooding the room with light, but the figure was already gone. That night, no one slept. The entity awakens. Over the next few days, the haunting escalated. The children were too afraid to sleep in their room. Danny's toys moved on their own, rolling across the floor in the dead of night. Emily's closet door swung open by itself, revealing nothing but a black, yawning void. Then came the voices. Whispers, creeping through the walls, murmuring just beneath the edge of comprehension. Sometimes it was laughter, low and cruel. Other times, it was their own names. Alan and Debbie were at their breaking point. Then, one evening, Alan came home late from work and saw her. Debbie stood in the hallway, her back to him. Her hair was down the way she wore it before bed. "Deb," he called softly. She didn't answer. She stood there, perfectly still, her arms limp at her sides. Alan stepped closer, an uneasy chill spreading through him. "Honey?" She moved. Not a turn, not a step. She shifted. 1 second she was there. The next she was inches from his face. But it wasn't Debbie. Her features were stretched, her mouth too wide, her eyes too empty. She grinned. Alan stumbled back, and then she was gone. His real wife ran in from the kitchen. "Alan, what's wrong?" Alan stared at her, his heart thundering. "You were just here." Debbie paled. "No, I wasn't." That was the night they decided to leave. The final night. They packed their bags, ready to abandon the house for good. But before they could leave, the entity showed its true form. It started with a rancid stench that filled the house, like rotting meat. The walls vibrated with an unseen force. And then, the shadow emerged. From the children's room, it slithered out like living ink, stretching across the walls and ceiling. It grew, towering over them, a blackened skeletal figure with eyes like burning coals. It opened its mouth, revealing jagged, uneven teeth. And then, it spoke. "You can't leave." The voice wasn't loud, but it sank into their bones. A command. A promise. Alan snapped. He grabbed the bunk beds, shaking them with all his strength. "You want this? Take it." The entity lunged. A violent wind tore through the house as Alan and Debbie grabbed their children and ran. The front door slammed behind them, and suddenly, everything went silent. The house stood still, dark and empty. They never went back. Aftermath. The Tallmans destroyed the bunk beds, burned them to ash, and once they were gone, the haunting stopped. They never spoke of what they saw. They never looked back. But sometimes, on cold Wisconsin nights, people say they see something in the woods behind the old Tallman house. A tall, gaunt figure with burning eyes, waiting, watching. Because some things don't die. Some things